Good morning. I have a visitor with me today. She is here from Norway. I don't know if I ever told you about her. Her name is Solveig, and she lived with me when I was 7 as an exchange student, and grew up and became a midwife. And then when I had Drew, she came over and helped deliver him, which was super special. And oh yeah, you know, because I went to see her when we went to the UK together. Then I left. No, it was a year before. I was with Deanie and Jack. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah, went to visit her, but I haven't seen her in 10 years, and she's here. I'll turn you around so you can see her. Hello. This is Solveig. She's going to listen to Miss Julia this morning, too. It's nice. Solveig's here. I get to actually take a vacation. She's making me stop work, which is great. All right, so we're on chapter 23. While we absorbed Hazel Marie's story, drank coffee, and kept an eye on the weather, little Lloyd wandered out into the shop, fascinated by the open hood of the race truck. He came back into the lounge, his eyes shining, and went over to Mr. Johnson. Jerry, Curtis said I could ride with you in your number 17 truck sometime. I sure would like that. Then, unable to contain himself, he reverted to proclaiming my driving skills again. After going around that track with Miss Julia, I wouldn't be scared. Y'all should have seen her. It was nothing, I said, waving my hand. Just a couple of turns around the track that we managed just fine. Though I can't say the name for Bigelow, I can't say the same for Bigelow and Wilson T. Hazel Marie, I went on, getting to my feet. I think we need to use the ladies. Where is it, please, Mr. Johnson? He pointed toward the front of the building. Go out in the hall, second door on your left. I got to my feet, saying, Come go with me, Hazel Marie. As I left with her right behind me, I heard little Lloyd begin again to give the details of our racetrack adventures, his voice high with the thrill of it all. There wasn't a sound from Mr. Pickens or Mr. Johnson all through his recitation, but as we went into the ladies' room, I heard Mr. Johnson yell that he had a good mind to put me in his truck at Phoenix. Fat chance, I thought. I didn't care to ride in a pickup, much less drive one. As soon as we got the door closed, I sat Hazel Marie down and told her of the latest course of action by Brother Vern and how she now had less than 10 days to answer the complaint he'd filed. Lillian and I have been keeping little Lloyd out of sight so Lieutenant Peavy and Deputy Daly can't implement their snatch and grab order, I told her. Tears welled up in her eyes while her mouth tightened with anger. Why can't Brother Vern leave us alone? Why is he doing this, especially now with all this other mess Wilson T's got me into? I don't know, but I tell you this. Brother Vern went to see Pastor Ledbetter Thursday morning, telling him that he'd been hearing uncomplimentary talk about you, and the pastor implied that he'd heard much the same. Now wait, Hazel Marie, I cautioned her as she started up at my news. Don't get upset. You know how bad Abbottsville is for gossip. If nothing's going on, somebody will make something up. But don't you worry, we'll put a stop to it. Anyway, that very afternoon, Brother Vern filed his complaint, claiming to be acting in the best interests of the child of all things. I studied on it for a minute, squinching up my eyes with the effort. You know, I've been wondering what the pastor knew and when he knew it. He was awful worried about Wilson T's whereabouts and what was in or not in the building fund. He thinks Wilson T embezzled the building fund? Oh, Lord, Miss Julia, how'd I get mixed up with such a man? She buried her face in her hands. We don't know for sure that any money's missing, but we do know that Wilson T put down a big bet on the Phoenix race, $10,000 worth. Mr. Pickens picked the lock at his townhouse and found all sorts of incriminating evidence. Gambling? He's into gambling, too? What did I ever see in him? Here he's as good as kidnapped me, brought Brother Vern out of the woodwork to threaten little Lloyd, helped that sneaky cousin of his steal from Jerry Johnson, and all because he wants to gamble. I swear I'd take his head off if I had my hands on him. I smiled at the thought of Hazel Marie, as quiet and shy as she was, taking anybody's head off. Well, the first thing we have to do is get you home. And now I'm going to drive up the mountain in this way. How I'm going to drive up the mountain in this weather, I don't know. One more thing, Hazel Marie. Nobody knows about the peril to little Lloyd but Lillian and me. We didn't know who we could trust, so we've kept it to ourselves. That means that Mr. Pickens doesn't know squat about it, so don't let on. For all I know, he'd turn him over to the sheriff, and I don't want to take a chance on his willingness to evade the law. Although he's certainly done so when it suited his purposes. Then we'd better leave before it gets any worse out there, she said, standing up and pulling Mr. Pickens' coat tighter. I have to get home so Binky can help me fight off Brother Vern. Oh, Miss Julia, you'll testify for me, won't you? If it comes to that, I mean. You don't even need to ask, and it won't come to that. All we have to do is show up at that thorn in the flesh for what he is and prove that the child's best interests lie right where he is. I don't care what kind of gossip Brother Vern's passing on. You're a decent woman and everybody knows it. Tears started streaming down her face. I don't know what's wrong with me. I've the worst luck with men. Seems like just the wrong kind pick me out from a crowd, and I don't have enough sense to tell them apart. She stopped and looked at me, her face downright ashy looking. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to throw off on Mr. Springer. I know you don't want to talk about him, and I don't either. And I wouldn't hurt you for the world, Miss Julia. It just seems like I keep getting fooled by the likes of Wilson T. Oh, not that Mr. Springer was anything like him, but then there's Brother Vern, who just waits for a chance to make trouble. And I've tried to live a good life, especially since you've been so good to us. I just try as hard as I can to make you proud of me, but nothing works out the way I want it to. Well, it took me a second or two to figure out what to say to her. She was right. I didn't want to discuss Wesley Lloyd with her, and it wouldn't have done either of us any good. But I had to admit from her point of view, he had been a mighty poor pick. From mine, too, come to think of it. And I could see that she'd had bad luck with men in her life, at least the ones I knew about. But I couldn't let her get down in the mouth, thinking she had some kind of curse dogging her when it came to men. That'd be as bad as Mr. Johnson putting such a store in a Lucky Charm. Why, I said to her, you just stop putting yourself down like that. I'll admit you've had bad luck so far, and I'm not excluding Mr. Springer. But you're not the only one as far as he was concerned. Your problem is that you've let the men do the picking. I say it's time you did some picking of your own. Take a hand in your own life for a change, and things will start looking up in the romance department. Before she could agree with me, we heard the front door open, and somebody walked through the hall, calling in a low voice to Curtis. I peeked out the bathroom door and nearly had heart failure. It's Wilson T., I whispered. I can't believe he'd just walk in like nothing's happened. Well, that little woman, who was as sweet and agreeable as anybody could want, built up a head of steam right in front of my eyes and stormed past me through the door. She came to a stop in front of Wilson T. and let him have it. What are you doing here? You followed us, didn't you? She demanded, her fist clenched by her side and her body trembling, she was so mad. Well, it won't do you any good because I don't want to see your sorry face again, so just go back where you came from. I stood by the bathroom door, waiting to see if Bigelow or any of his crew were coming in behind him, and wondering where Mr. Pickens was. Wilson T., looking somewhat bedraggled from his vehicular accident, said, If you've got it, Hazel Marie, just hand it over. That's all I'm asking. I never meant for you to get mixed up in this, but I've got to have what you took from Bobby. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. He took a step toward her, but she stood her ground. Listen, I don't want to hurt you, but I've got to have it. Bobby made me come over here, and I can't go back without it. You know how he is, so give it here and be gone. You're going to be gone anyway, because I don't have anything of his, and you've got a nerve just walking in here and acting like you didn't lock me up and lug me all over the state like a sack of potatoes. Wilson T.'s mouth tightened as he glared at her, doing a little fist clenching himself. I saw Curtis standing beside the truck he'd been working on. Then he glanced out a back window as Mr. Johnson and Mr. Pickens passed by. I could see them talking, gesturing as to the weather, completely unaware of the tense situation inside. Little Lloyd peeked out of the lounge, his eyes big at the sight of his mother and Wilson T. "Be that way then," Wilson T. said. "We'll see what you say when Bobby gets hold of you. Let's go." He grabbed her arm and pulled her towards the door. Before I could make a move, little Lloyd streaked across the garage and made a flying leap for Wilson T.'s back, his arms flailing like a windmill. "Don't you hurt my mama. You get away from her." I got myself in gear and clutched a handful of Wilson T.'s overcoat, trying to pull him away from Hazel Marie. He shoved little Lloyd aside and shook me off, neither of us slowing him down in his rush for the door, pushing Hazel Marie before him. "Stop!" I yelled. "Mr. Pickens, help!" I grabbed the back of Wilson T.'s collar, pulling it tight enough to choke him, while little Lloyd latched onto his leg. Hazel Marie screamed as she twisted and turned, trying to break his hold. Wilson T. shook his leg, sending little Lloyd sprawling, and swatted at me. He pushed Hazel Marie against the wall, where she got enough purchase to slip his grasp. She turned and kicked and pounded on him, screeching at the top of her lungs, "Don't you hurt him! Leave my baby alone!" His face red as a beet from the hold I had on his collar, Wilson T. grabbed her and shook her until her head flopped back and forth. "Give it here," he yelled, gasping for breath. "I know you've got it. Give it to me." I turned loose of his collar, took a firm hold of my pocketbook, and started swatting him over the head with it. Wilson T. kept yelling, "Where is it?" and Hazel Marie screamed and scratched at him, while little Lloyd kicked and hollered, "Don't you hurt my mama." I yelled for Mr. Pickens, adding my 2 cents worth to the din, and at the same time getting in a particularly well-aimed whack, the jar of Metamucil in my pocketbook coming in quite handy as it clanked against Wilson T.'s head. He released Hazel Marie and threw back his arm, sending me slamming against the front door. Before I could catch myself, my feet slid out from under me on the waxed floor, and I flopped down on my backside with my legs spraddled out in the most shameful fashion. Sitting there slightly dazed with the suddenness of it, I felt myself being slid across the floor as the door was pushed open behind me. Mr. Pickens came barreling in, leaving me crumpled up between the door and the wall. I heard Mr. Johnson come at Wilson T. from the opposite side, yelling, "Dog bite it, leave that woman alone," as he snatched little Lloyd out of the fray. Mr. Pickens swung Wilson T. around and pushed him against the wall hard enough to put a dent in it. He had his hands more than full with Hazel Marie, though, because she kept going after Wilson T. She flew into him like a banny rooster, scratching and clawing at him, yelling, "I've had enough of you, you sorry excuse for a Christian. You're going to regret the day you got me in this mess." Hold on here," Mr. Pickens said, grabbing her around the waist from behind and holding her close. "Turn me loose. He's got it coming, and I'm going to give it to him." She tried to wiggle free of Mr. Pickens, but he had a good hold on her, which was probably the only thing that saved Wilson T. from serious injury. My land, I thought, as I struggled to stand up, having to turn over and hike my rear end up in the air so I could push off with my hands. It's the knees that go first, you know, and mine needed all the help they could get. But I wasn't worrying about my own ungraceful climb to my feet, being awed and amazed at Hazel Marie's display of fighting spirit. She was wound up like a top, and if not for Mr. Pickens' arms around her, she'd have torn into Wilson T. again. "Hold on now," Mr. Pickens said. "Let's get this straightened out. Who is this, anyway?" "Wilson T. Hodge, that's who," little Lloyd yelled. "Bigelow's jackass is more like it," Hazel Marie said, struggling in Mr. Pickens' grasp. Mr. Johnson switched his head around and let out a yell that echoed around the shop. "Bigelow, is that egg-sucking dog around here?" Wilson T. didn't get a chance to answer. Hazel Marie balled up her fist and swung with all her might, landing a good one right on his nose. Wilson T. grabbed at his face and added his bellow to Mr. Johnson's. He looked ready to tear Hazel Marie limb from limb, and might have done it if Mr. Pickens hadn't put a hand out to hold him back. Mr. Pickens pulled Hazel Marie out of arm's reach, trying his best to calm her down. Mr. Johnson noticed me hanging onto the doorknob, trying to straighten myself up and catch my breath. He came over, bellowing right in my ear. "You all right, lady? Hurt anything?" "Why, no, Mr. Johnson, thank you for asking, but I think I'd like to sit down for a minute." He grabbed a chair, swung it behind me, and shoved it against my knees, yelling, Sit on down and rest yourself." Wilson T. had pulled himself together by this time and had regained some of his take-charge manner. "I don't know who you gentlemen are, but all I'm trying to do is get back something this woman has stolen." Hazel Marie strained against Mr. Pickens' arms, trying to get at Wilson T. again. "You crooked, lying, underhanded son of a biscuit eater!" Mr. Pickens' eyebrows shot up at Hazel Marie's command of the language, and Mr. Johnson roared, "Whoa!" Then, glaring eye to eye with Mr. T., Mr. Johnson bellowed, "You with Bigelow? You one of them thieves that robbed me? Huh? Huh? I want my Lucky Charm back, and my discs and tools, and I want compensation for vandalizing my shop. J.D., you better call the cops before I take somebody's head off here." Wilson T. jerked away from him and straightened his suit coat down with an effort to regain his dignity. "I don't know anything about your shop problems. I was in Abbottsville up until yesterday, and I can prove it. Hazel Marie," he said, turning to her, "come on with me, and you can give Bobby's property back to him. I don't care what you do after that." "What? I don't have anything to give to Bobby." Hazel Marie was still so mad she could hardly catch her breath. "Get that through your thick head, and don't try to weasel out of anything. You may not have robbed anybody, but you took me off in that RV and wouldn't let me go. That was all Bobby's doing. You recall that he wouldn't let me leave either. So if he's in trouble with the law, it has nothing to do with me. I'm just a messenger here, trying to get back what you took from him. Then I'm washing my hands of it all." Hazel Marie squirmed in Mr. Pickens' arms, trying to get at Wilson T. again. Okay, Mr. Pickens kept saying, trying to get her under control. Then to Wilson T. "She says she doesn't have what you're looking for, so leave it alone." "I'm warning you," Wilson T. started, but that was the wrong thing to say to Mr. Pickens, as I had earlier learned. Mr. Pickens handed Hazel Marie over to Mr. Johnson, who was frowning with the strain of trying to hear what everybody was saying. Then Mr. Pickens stepped up and got right in Wilson T.'s face. "Warn me again." Wilson T. shriveled up at Mr. Pickens' challenge, to say nothing of his manly presence standing foursquare and ready in front of him. I drew in a breath, hoping I wouldn't have to be a witness to an all-out dogfight, which, if it came down to it, Mr. Pickens would fix Wilson T.'s little red wagon good. There'd be a mess to clean up, though. Wilson T. stared across Mr. Pickens' shoulder, unwilling to meet his eyes, and said, "I just want what belongs to Bobby. Make her take it back to him, and we're through here." Mr. Pickens gave a short laugh. "Make her? Man, you don't know women. I'm not about to make her do anything." I'd known all along that Mr. Pickens was a good man at heart. Wilson T. then tried another tack. "Look," he said, finally meeting Mr. Pickens' eyes in an effort to talk man to man, "I have to warn all of you. She's taken something that belongs to Bobby, and it's valuable. You don't want to tangle with him because, well, let's just say he'll get it back one way or another." "What are we talking about here?" "She knows. Hazel Marie, you don't know what you're letting yourself in for." Hazel Marie's eyes blazed at him as she tried to jerk herself away from Mr. Johnson. "I didn't know what I was letting myself in for when I met you, either. Get your sorry hide out of here, and I hope you and Bobby Bigelow rot in jail for the rest of your crooked lives." "Where is that sneaking thief anyway?" Mr. Johnson bellowed, turning Hazel Marie loose and rushing at Wilson T. "Tell me where he is." "I don't know." Wilson T. cringed against the auditory onslaught. "I swear I don't know. He told me to get back what she stole from him, and that's all I know." "I didn't steal anything from him," Hazel Marie cried as Mr. Pickens grabbed her again. "Where's Bigelow?" Mr. Johnson blasted the air like a thunderclap. "Where is he?" "I don't know, I tell you," Wilson T. said, holding his arms in front of his face, scuttling away from Mr. Johnson's screwed-up face and blistering voice. "He's gone on ahead before the weather. I'm supposed to go back to Abbottsville, to church, you know, my work. But I have to get back what she stole. Please, that's all I know." "You lying thing, you!" Hazel Marie yelled. "Get out of my sight." "Good idea," Mr. Pickens said, keeping her uncommonly close to him. "Pack it in, Hodge. You may not have had anything to do with the robbery here, but the Abbott County Sheriff will want to talk to you." Then he spoke softly to Hazel Marie. "Come on now. It's over for now." She went docilely enough, except for spitting at Wilson T. as she passed by. Mr. Pickens kept hold of her arm as he led her towards the lounge. Mr. Johnson got up in Wilson T.'s face again, and in his usual force of manner told him to take a hike and tell Bobby Bigelow that he was going to whip him to within an inch of his life. If Bigelow was ever man enough to face him, instead of sneaking into people's garages to tear up Jack and steal what didn't belong to him. Wilson T. made haste to leave, and I comforted myself with the thought of Lieutenant Peavy putting him on the hot seat when he got home. "Come on, little Lloyd," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I declare your mother made me so tired just watching her that I need to sit down a while." She was something, wasn't she? A note of pride filled his voice, and it warmed my heart to hear it. The end of that chapter. Hope you have a good day today. Bye.